The northern NCR army had been utterly decimated, leaving no survivors to tell the tale of their fall. The once proud and powerful force, the largest to have risen after the Great War, had been brought to its knees by the ruthless defenders of the Master's army. In a brutal and decisive battle near their capital, the Master's forces shattered the NCR's northern military might, leaving their once sprawling front lines in ruins. What had once been thought of as an unstoppable military machine was now little more than broken armor and smoldering wrecks, scattered across the desolate landscape. News of the NCR's crushing defeat spread like wildfire across the wastelands. It didn't take long for the scavengers, raiders, and opportunists to realize that the entire northern expanse of the NCR was now vulnerable, undefended by any organized forces. Rumors of abandoned towns, unguarded supply lines, and helpless citizens reached even the furthest corners of the frontier, drawing the attention of every cutthroat and would-be warlord in the region. The cause of this devastating loss was rooted in two key defeats that had crippled the NCR's ability to respond. First, the Brotherhood of Steel had delivered a crushing blow, seizing control of New Reno, a city that had been vital not only for its strategic location but for its resources and influence over the region. The Brotherhood's technological superiority had overwhelmed the NCR's forces, leaving the northern command structure in disarray. The second, and perhaps even more alarming event, was the sudden and unexpected rise of the Master's army in Broken Hills. What began as whispers of strange movements in the shadows quickly evolved into a full-scale rebellion as the remnants of super mutants, ghouls, and fanatical followers of the Master's old creed united under a new and terrifying banner. The NCR, already spread thin, was unprepared for the ferocity of the uprising. Broken Hills, once a prosperous mining town, had become a fortress of horror, a symbol of the NCR's failure to maintain control. In one swift campaign, the Master's army had pushed the NCR out, claiming vast swathes of land in the process. Isolated, broken, and without reinforcements, the northern NCR forces found themselves cut off from their southern allies. The routes that had once supplied them with weapons, food, and reinforcements were now either controlled by enemies or rendered impassable by the chaotic state of the war. The Master's forces, emboldened by their recent victories, now stood poised to sweep through the unprotected northern territories like a plague, as NCR citizens prayed for salvation that seemed unlikely to come. The victory of the Master's army had far-reaching consequences, rippling through the fractured political landscape of the post-war world. Among those who seized the moment was NCR's western neighbor, Vault City, a highly advanced and isolationist community that had long eyed the territories controlled by the NCR with envy and suspicion. With the NCR forces in disarray and their northern lands left exposed, Vault City saw a rare opportunity to expand its influence and reclaim territory it had once lost. Their first target, the strategic settlement of the Den. The Den, a notorious hub of trade and vice, had fallen under NCR control only recently, but its defense was minimal. A small, under-equipped detachment of NCR troops was all that stood between Vault City's army and total control of the town. The well-organized and technologically superior forces of Vault City made quick work of the NCR presence, crushing their meager defenses with little effort. Within hours, Vault City had reclaimed the Den, asserting their dominance and re-establishing control over lands they considered their rightful property. But Vault City was not content to stop there. Their leadership, emboldened by the swift victory at the Den, turned their attention to a larger prize, Redding. Redding, a town rich in gold, strategically located at a critical junction, had been under NCR occupation for several years, its resources drained to fuel the NCR's war efforts. Vault City had always coveted Redding for its wealth and influence in the region, but with NCR forces spread thin and the Master's army wreaking havoc to the east, the moment was ripe to strike. Vault City's forces, heavily armed and backed by advanced pre-war technology, began their march on Redding. But as their scouts approached the outskirts of the town, they found the streets eerily quiet. The town's militia, long demoralized by NCR's occupation and hearing whispers of Vault City's impending arrival, had fled before the first Vault City soldier even set foot in the city. Without the will or means to defend themselves, Redding's militia had abandoned their posts, leaving the town defenseless. The takeover was swift. Vault City's troops entered Reading unopposed, encountering no resistance save for a few stragglers who had chosen to stay behind, hoping to avoid the chaos that often followed in the wake of such conquests. In just a few hours, Vault City had reasserted control over Reading, a town that had once flourished under its own autonomy but had suffered greatly under NCR's heavy-handed occupation. Vault City's banners now flew over the town square, a symbol of their expanding power in the region. The people of Reading, long tired of NCR's taxes, corruption, and military presence, greeted Vault City's arrival with a mix of relief and apprehension. Though Vault City's reputation as an elitist society that prized its own citizens over outsiders preceded them, the people of Reading hoped for better days under their new rulers. Vault City, in turn, promised stability, protection, and a return to prosperity, at least for those who would submit to their authority. With both the Den and Reading now under their control, Vault City had begun to establish a foothold in the northern NCR territories. Their leaders, ever calculating, saw the chaos caused by the Master's Army and the Brotherhood of Steel as the perfect storm for their ambitions. While the NCR struggled to regroup and the Master's Army continued its relentless march southward, Vault City quietly expanded its influence, taking advantage of every NCR weakness, every fracture in their once mighty dominion. But Vault City's ambitions came with their own risks. The rapid expansion put them on a collision course not only with the remnants of the NCR, but with the Brotherhood of Steel and the Master's Army as well. For now, they celebrated their victories, but dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the war-torn wasteland had never been kind to those who sought to build empires on the ashes of the old world. As Vault City consolidated its power, the fragile balance of the post-war world shifted further into chaos. In the south, the NCR leadership scrambled to maintain order, while to the north, whispers of rebellion and unrest began to spread among the towns and settlements that had once looked to the NCR for protection. The Master's Army, Vault City, the Brotherhood of Steel, and even the remnants of raider bands and mutant tribes now vied for control of the shattered world, each one seeking to carve out their own future in the ruins of the old. In this time of uncertainty, only one thing was clear: the NCR's reign over the North had come to a violent and catastrophic end, and a new age of warfare and shifting alliances was just beginning. The overwhelming victory of the Master's Army sent shockwaves across the wasteland, inspiring not just opportunistic neighbors, but the very settlements under NCR rule to rise up in defiance. One of the first to throw off the NCR's yoke was Salt Lake City, a town that had long grown weary of NCR's taxes, military occupation, and distant governance. The people of Salt Lake City, emboldened by the news of NCR's defeat at the hands of the Master's Army, saw their chance for freedom. They rallied together, forming militias and organizing a swift uprising that caught the small NCR garrison stationed there completely off guard. In a single night, the people of Salt Lake City captured the NCR soldiers, throwing them into makeshift prisons and declaring the city's independence from the NCR. For the first time in years, Salt Lake City breathed the air of freedom, no longer shackled by NCR's laws or military presence. The newly established leadership of the city wasted no time in making bold decisions. Within just 2 days of declaring independence, the city's council convened, and in a dramatic vote, they made a fateful choice to formally align themselves with the Master's Army. The decision sent a clear message to the rest of the region. Salt Lake City was no longer a neutral or isolated rebellion. It had thrown its lot in with one of the most feared and powerful forces in the wasteland. The people of the city believed that under the Master's banner, they would not only secure their independence, but find protection and prosperity in a world increasingly dominated by conflict. Meanwhile, the horrors unleashed by the Master's Army continued to spread. The defenders of Vault 8, another settlement that had broken away from NCR control, began their own campaign of conquest. Vault 8, once a symbol of hope and stability in the post-apocalyptic world, had now transformed into a war machine, driven by the influence of the Master's forces. Without so much as burying the dead that littered the streets after the recent conflict, Vault 8's forces turned their eyes to Gecko, the nearby town of ghouls that had been under NCR's governance for years. Gecko had always been a curious town, populated largely by ghouls who had been living in relative peace, though under NCR oversight. However, as Vault 8's army approached, the ghouls found themselves ill-prepared for the coming storm. The attack was swift and merciless. Though the ghouls of Gecko attempted to mount a defense, they were no match for the heavily armed forces of Vault 8. Within hours, Gecko had fallen. The ghouls, unable to resist the overwhelming power of their attackers, either fled or were captured, and Vault 8 planted their banner in the center of the town. Another victory for the Master's army. Yet the campaign of conquest did not stop there. To the east, the forces from Broken Hills, led by veterans of the Master's Rebellion, set their sights on Modoc, one of the last NCR outposts in the north. Modoc, once a thriving agricultural town, had become a symbol of NCR resilience, one of the few places that had not yet fallen to the chaos engulfing the northern territories. But with the Master's army now surging from multiple fronts, Modoc's fate seemed all but sealed. The Broken Hills forces moved quickly, using the roads that were now under their control to launch a lightning strike on Modoc. The NCR troops stationed there, weary from the ongoing battles and cut off from reinforcements, could do little to hold back the tide. The citizens of Modoc, long burdened by NCR's rule and now facing the might of the Master's army, began to lose hope. Many surrendered without a fight, while the remaining NCR soldiers attempted a last-ditch effort to hold their ground. It was futile. In a matter of days, Modoc had fallen. The last vestiges of NCR's northern defenses were swept aside, and the Master's army now stood on the brink of total domination in the region. With each victory, their influence spread like a dark shadow, and the once powerful NCR found itself retreating further south, its leadership scrambling to save what little remained of its shattered northern empire. But the conquests were not just about land and power. Each victory by the Master's army sent a message to the wasteland. The old world, symbolized by the NCR, was dying, and a new order was rising. An order built on strength, fear, and unity under the Master's banner. The Brotherhood of Steel, Vault City, and other factions had their own ambitions, but the Master's army was different. It was a force of nature, driven by an almost religious zeal to reshape the wasteland into something new, something terrible. As NCR continued to fall back, and settlements either declared independence or joined forces with the Master, the balance of power in the wasteland shifted dramatically. What had once been the dream of a united and restored civilization under NCR's rule had now become a nightmare of war, rebellion, and conquest. And the Master's army, with its forces spread across the north like wildfire, was only just beginning. In the south, the NCR leadership could only watch as their northern territories crumbled, unsure if they could muster the strength to turn the tide. Meanwhile, the Master's army grew bolder, its influence spreading like a virus, infecting the hearts and minds of those who had once resisted. The wasteland was on the verge of a new era, one not of peace or rebuilding, but of domination, destruction, and the remaking of the world in the image of the Master's vision. The defeat of the NCR had sent shockwaves not only through its crumbling northern territories, but deep into the heart of its southern strongholds. What was once a sprawling republic, the mightiest power in the wasteland, was now reduced to a shadow of its former self. The NCR had lost nearly 70% of its territory, and the citizens who remained within its shrinking borders faced an uncertain future. Panic spread like wildfire across the southern settlements as the people realized that the once great republic was no longer invincible. Vegas, the crown jewel of NCR's southern holdings, remained one of the few major territories still under NCR control. Yet, even this oasis of lights and wealth now stood on the edge of the abyss. The fear that the Enclave, an ancient enemy that had long been lurking in the shadows, would soon set its sights on the vulnerable city was ever present. The Enclave, with its advanced technology and fanatical commitment to restoring pre-war America under its own twisted vision, had been biding its time, waiting for the NCR to falter. Now, with the NCR teetering on the brink, Vegas was likely next in their crosshairs. Rumors spread through the neon-lit streets of Vegas that Enclave scouts had already been seen patrolling the outskirts, preparing for a strike. The NCR forces stationed there were stretched thin, caught between defending the city and the threat of the Master's army creeping ever closer. Many in Vegas feared that the city's days as an NCR stronghold were numbered, and the specter of Enclave domination loomed larger with each passing day. Meanwhile, to the west, another of NCR's remaining holdings, the strategic military base of Hawthorne, stood equally exposed. The NCR had retained control over Hawthorne due to its importance as a weapons depot and defensive outpost, but the situation there was equally grim. Hawthorne's commanders knew it was only a matter of time before one of two powerful enemies, either the Brotherhood of Steel or the Master's Army, would turn their gaze toward the base. The Brotherhood of Steel, emboldened by their victory in New Reno and the weakening of the NCR, had been steadily growing in power. Their advanced technology, combined with their single-minded mission to control and hoard all pre-war technology, made them a formidable threat. Hawthorne, with its stockpile of weapons and military hardware, was a prime target for their next assault. If the Brotherhood managed to take Hawthorne, it would give them a decisive advantage in the ongoing power struggle across the wasteland. But the forces of the Master's Army were not far behind, and Hawthorne also sat on their path of conquest. With the Master's zealots already controlling much of the northern territories, the next logical step would be to sweep down and strike at NCR's southern defenses. The defenders of Hawthorne faced an impossible choice: prepare for an attack from the Brotherhood or fortify against the inevitable arrival of the Master's forces. In either scenario, the odds were bleak. Amidst this chaos, the president of the NCR, a figure whose authority was now severely diminished, took to the airwaves to deliver a speech to the disheartened people of the Republic. Standing in front of the tattered NCR flag, he sought to project strength and resolve, though the cracks in his confidence were visible to anyone who watched closely. His voice, hoarse from days of crisis meetings and desperate pleas to rally support, echoed across the wasteland's radios. "The NCR has not fallen," the president declared, his voice carried by the static-filled airwaves to the scattered settlements still loyal to the Republic. "We have faced setbacks before, and we have always risen. The borders of California will stand firm. Our people will stand firm. We will defend what remains of our great republic, and we will fight to take back what has been stolen from us." The president outlined a plan that seemed more like a last-ditch effort than a well-organized strategy. The NCR, he declared, would focus its efforts on holding the southern border of California and defending its core territories. He called for an all-out campaign to reclaim key cities that had been lost to the Brotherhood of Steel and other factions. Jumptown, the Hub, and even New Antietam, once thriving centers of NCR governance, were now slated to be retaken, even though the resources to do so were slim. The president's speech was meant to rally the people, but many within the NCR knew that the days of their expansive republic were over. The challenges ahead were too great, and the enemies too numerous. The Master's Army, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, and even Vault City now stood poised to carve up what was left of NCR's territory. The grand vision of a united wasteland under the NCR banner had crumbled, and the Republic's citizens now had to face the harsh reality that survival, not conquest, was their most immediate concern. Despite the president's words, the situation in the field remained dire. The NCR's military, once one of the most powerful forces in the wasteland, had been stretched beyond its limits. Many of its best commanders had either been killed or captured in the northern defeats, and the morale of the remaining troops was at an all-time low. Desertion rates were climbing as soldiers questioned whether their sacrifices were in vain. The few remaining NCR officers who still held out hope were tasked with the impossible job of holding the line against multiple, far stronger enemies. But there were still pockets of resistance. In Jumptown, a small but determined militia had formed, refusing to give up their town without a fight. In the Hub, merchants and traders, who had grown rich under NCR rule, began to pool their resources to hire mercenaries to defend their city. And in New Antietam, a group of citizens, inspired by the old ideals of democracy and freedom, secretly plotted to take back their home from those who had seized it. Yet even these sparks of resistance seemed small against the rising tides of war. The Brotherhood of Steel's tanks rumbled in the distance, the Master's forces continued their relentless march southward, and the Enclave watched with cold, calculating eyes, ready to swoop in and seize what remained of NCR's riches. As the NCR clung to life, its people faced a world where everything they had built over the years of post-war recovery was slipping away. But for now, they held on, fighting to defend their borders, reclaim their lost cities, and preserve the legacy of the Republic. Whether the NCR could rise again or be consigned to the annals of history was a question no one could yet answer. The only certainty was that the wasteland, once again, had become a battleground for the souls and futures of all who lived within its shattered boundaries. As the war between the NCR and the Master's army raged on, another power began to rise amidst the chaos, the Brotherhood of Steel. With both the NCR and the Master's army locked in a brutal conflict that left vast swaths of land open for the taking, the Brotherhood quietly expanded its influence. While the NCR was retreating and the Master's forces were pushing ever southward, the Brotherhood capitalized on the shifting tides, taking control of key cities and strategic locations across the wasteland. What had started as a mere faction dedicated to preserving and controlling pre-war technology had transformed into a military juggernaut. The Brotherhood now boasted one of the most advanced and well-equipped armies in the wasteland. Their power extended across a vast territory, encompassing more cities and settlements than any other faction. As they absorbed new lands, they secured valuable resources, factories, bunkers, weapon caches that only strengthened their technological dominance. Once seen as a secretive, isolationist group, the Brotherhood had now emerged as a major player in the wasteland's power struggle, its banners flying high over numerous towns and outposts. Yet, despite this rapid expansion, the Brotherhood's rise came with significant risks. The newly acquired territory was vast, stretching across the remains of former NCR lands and even encroaching upon areas once thought untouchable. With each city and settlement they claimed, the Brotherhood's borders expanded, bringing them into direct contact with nearly every other faction in the wasteland. From the war-torn lands controlled by the Master's army to the remnants of NCR territory and even the isolated strongholds of the Enclave, the Brotherhood now found itself surrounded on all sides by potential enemies. This newfound territorial reach was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the Brotherhood had become the largest and most advanced military power in the wasteland, but on the other, they now faced the challenge of defending such a sprawling domain. The logistics of maintaining order, ensuring loyalty, and defending against inevitable attacks stretched even the Brotherhood's formidable resources thin. The cracks were already beginning to show. Patrols were spread too wide, and while the Brotherhood had the technological edge, the human cost of holding these vast territories was growing. Some within the Brotherhood's ranks began to see eerie parallels between their situation and that of the NCR before its collapse. The NCR had once been the dominant force, controlling vast lands and numerous cities, only to find itself stretched too thin and overwhelmed by enemies on all fronts. The very same fate now loomed over the Brotherhood. As they expanded their territory, they became increasingly vulnerable to coordinated strikes from their enemies, who were no longer just distant threats but neighbors. One of the most immediate dangers was the Master's army, which had shown no hesitation in sweeping through NCR's weakened northern territories. While the Brotherhood's technological superiority was undeniable, the Master's army was growing in both numbers and fervor. With its forces already clashing with Brotherhood patrols on the northern borders, it seemed only a matter of time before the two powers would collide in a full-scale war. And then there was the NCR itself, battered but not yet broken. The NCR leadership, though weakened, would no doubt seek to reclaim its lost cities and might view the Brotherhood as an occupier rather than a liberator. But perhaps the most silent and dangerous threat to the Brotherhood came from the shadows, the Enclave. The Enclave, while not actively expanding during the chaos of the NCR's collapse, remained a powerful force, hidden in the dark corners of the wasteland. Their highly advanced technology and ruthless ideology made them a wildcard in the growing conflict. While the Brotherhood focused on maintaining its new territories and preparing for possible conflict with the Master's army and NCR, the Enclave watched and waited, biding their time. The Enclave, unlike the Brotherhood, had no interest in conquering vast territories or engaging in open warfare, at least not yet. They were content to let the Brotherhood stretch itself thin, knowing that the task of holding such a vast amount of land would eventually lead to fractures within their enemies' ranks. For the Enclave, this was a time to observe, plan, and wait for the right moment to strike. Their operatives remained hidden, gathering intelligence on all the major factions, including the Brotherhood, waiting for the perfect opportunity to exploit the inevitable weaknesses that would arise from overextension. For now, the Enclave remained in the shadows, not overtly participating in the upheaval across the wasteland, but their influence was felt. As Brotherhood forces fortified their newly acquired holdings and prepared for war on multiple fronts, whispers of Enclave spies and hidden operations spread through the wasteland. While the Master's army and NCR were open in their ambitions, the Enclave's plans remained shrouded in mystery, their true intentions known only to the highest-ranking members of their secretive organization. Despite the external threats, the Brotherhood continued to project strength. Their paladins, equipped with power armor and advanced weaponry, were a fearsome sight, and many towns gladly accepted Brotherhood protection in exchange for resources and loyalty. But underneath this display of power, tension brewed. The Brotherhood's leadership faced increasing pressure to hold onto their new lands, while whispers within their ranks spoke of overconfidence and the growing danger of spreading too thin. The more territory they controlled, the more enemies they made, and enemies were never in short supply in the wasteland. As the Brotherhood prepared for what would undoubtedly be one of the greatest challenges in its history, the wasteland itself shifted. With the NCR weakened, the Master's army on the march, and the Enclave lurking in the shadows, the future of the Brotherhood of Steel hung in the balance. Would they succeed where the NCR had failed, solidifying their hold over the wasteland and securing their position as its ultimate rulers? Or would they, like the NCR before them, crumble under the weight of their own ambition, consumed by the very power they sought to control? In the end, the fate of the Brotherhood of Steel, like that of all the factions in the wasteland, remained uncertain. But one thing was clear, the wars were far from over, and the battle for control of the wasteland was just beginning. The wasteland had a way of devouring those who sought to claim it for themselves, and the Brotherhood would soon learn that even the strongest armor could not protect them from the harsh realities of the New World.